Good morning, girls. In the previous class, we saw the causes that led to the outbreak of the French Revolution, the social, political, and the economic causes. Now, today we'll be learning about the role of intellectuals. Role of intellectuals. Intellectual means someone who is intelligent. The Enlightenment movement, which evolved over the course of the 18th century in Europe, exposed the contemporary social and political abuses. So this movement, the Enlightenment movement, it evolved. Evolve means to develop or to rise. So the moment it developed in Europe during the 18th century. Now, what is this Enlightenment movement? This movement, it stressed on reason and science. It made people aware of the importance of judging everything on the basis of reason and not to believe anything blindly. So this Enlightenment movement, it expose means to reveal or to bring into light. So it exposed the contemporary social and political abuses. It brought into light the social and political abuses that were existing at that period. Prominent French intellectuals like Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Diderot infused independent thinking among the French people and convinced them of the need for having reforms. Now, there were some French intellectuals, some famous French intellectuals like Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Diderot. These intellectuals, they infused. Infuse means to create or to fill. So they filled people's mind with independent thinking and they made them understand the need for having reforms. Reforms means to change anything that is defective. So they convinced people, they made them understand that there were some defects and these defects had to be changed. They aroused the people's feelings against the prevailing inequalities. Now, we had already learned that there were many inequalities existing in the society. For example, there were the three estates, the three classes, and in these three classes, the first two classes, they were the privileged classes who had all the rights, whereas the third estate, they were the unprivileged class. So these intellectuals, they made people aware, they made people understand that there were many inequalities existing in the society and these inequalities had to be changed. By means of their writings, these thinkers exposed the ills of the French political and social setup and created a sense of dissatisfaction among the people. These intellectuals, through their writings, they began to expose the defects that were there in the French social and political setup, and these writings, they created a dissatisfaction among the people. Outbreak of the Revolution. The economic condition of France began to decline from the period of Louis XIV and went from bad to worse during the reign of Louis XVI. So the economic condition of France, it began to decline. Decline means to fall. So it began to decline during the period of Louis XIV, and by the time Louis XVI came to rule, it was even more worse. The economic condition became even more worse. Between 1786 and 1788, Louis XVI changed finance ministers in succession to deal with the financial crisis. So we had already learned that France, they had constant wars, and the leaders, the kings and the nobles, they led a luxurious life. So these they led to these reasons. Because of the luxurious life of the kings and the constant wars, France, they had huge financial crisis. In order to meet these financial crises, Louis XVI, he kept changing the finance ministers. In 1786, the royal treasury turned empty and it was decided to impose a uniform land tax on all sections of the society, as well as to impose a new stamp tax. So the economic condition, it became so worse that by 1786, the royal treasury, it is a place where the royal money or the state money is stored. So the economic condition, it became very worse that the royal treasury, it was empty. All the money was over. And as you all know that to run a state, money is needed. So to collect that money, all the sections, all the people, they had to pay a land tax. A uniform land tax was imposed. Impose means to apply. So it was all the people of the society, they had to pay a land tax and also a stamp tax. Now the stamp tax, it was a tax which was imposed on the purchase of any property or document. So there was this land tax and the stamp tax which people had to pay in order for the state to have money to run the state. The economic condition of the common people who belonged to the third estate was bad, as very little was left in their pockets after meeting their feudal obligations and paying a number of tolls and taxes. So the people who belonged to the third estate, they became very poor under this feudal system. This feudal system or the feudalism, it was a social system where most of the land was owned by the state, and the kings, they used to give these lands to the common people or nobles in return for their service. So in return for this land that they gave, these common people, they had to pay some tax, or they had to give a share of their profit, or they had to do some service like some military service. So under this feudal system, the common people, the third estate people, they were becoming very poor because half of the profit that they made went to the state. The Parliament of Paris did not have the authority to impose new taxes and declared that only the Estates General was empowered to impose new taxes. The Estates General was an old representative council of France comprising the three estates, that is the clergy, the nobility and the bourgeoisie. Now, the Paris Parliament, they did not have the power to impose any taxes. It was only the Estates General. The Estates General had the power to impose new taxes. Now, what was this Estates General? It was an old representative council of France comprising the three estates. Now, this Estates General, it had representatives of all the three estates, the clergy, the nobility and the bourgeoisie. Now, they had representatives from all the three classes, from the clergy class, from the nobility and the common people. Of these three estates, the first two estates were against sitting with the third estate. Now, in this Estates General, the first two estates, the privileged classes, they were against sitting with the third estate. The Estates General had not been convened for a long time by the absolute monarchs of France, so that they could raise taxes and spend public money without any hassle. These Estates General, they were supposed to gather, they were supposed to assemble frequently in order to make decisions, but for a long time they did not assemble. Convene means to meet or to assemble. Now, why didn't they assemble? Because the state, the absolute monarchs, they had to raise taxes and spend public money without any hassles. Hassles means any trouble. So they were not, the Estates Generals, they were not called for any assembly because the kings and the nobles, they did not want to have any trouble in collecting taxes and in spending money. The precarious financial condition and the desire to avoid a complete financial breakdown forced Louis XVI to summon the Estates General on May 5th, 1789 at Versailles. So, this precarious means unsteady. The financial condition was not steady, it was declining. The financial condition was declining. So to avoid a complete financial breakdown, the ruler Louis XVI, he was forced to summon. Summon means to call together. He was forced to call together the Estates General on May 5th, 1789 at Versailles. Finally, when the Estates General was convened, the representatives of the first and the second estates met separately. So when the Estates General they were asked to assemble, the first and the second estates, the privileged class, they met separately. This was not liked by the members of the third estate, and they demanded that the three estates should sit together and vote as individuals. So when the first and the second estates they met, they assembled separately. The third estate did not like this, and they wanted all the three estates to sit together and to vote as individuals. They also demanded that the representatives of the third estate should be double in number than the first and the second estates. However, the issue of doubling the members remained unsolved. And these third estate members, they kept forward a demand that the number of third estate representatives should be doubled, because we had already learned that the first and the two estates they formed only 1% of the total population. So 99% of the population belonged to the third estate, the common people. So they kept forward a demand that the number of representatives, the number of third estate representatives should be doubled, but it remained unsolved. It was not solved. Their demand was not solved. In 1789, Louis XVI again convened the Estates General. However, he wanted the three estates to meet separately so that each one of them would exercise one vote. So, in 1789, Louis XVI he asked the Estates General to gather again, but this time, Louis XVI, he wanted all the three estates to meet separately. But the third estate demanded a joint meeting of the three estates with each member exercising one vote. Even though Louis XVI, he wanted all the three estates to meet separately, the third estate, they kept forward the demand that all the three estates, they should have a joint meeting. When no agreement could be reached, the third estate took the revolutionary step of leaving the Estates General and proclaimed itself as the National Assembly of France on June 17, 1789. Now, this demand, it was not met. Their demand of the third estate was not satisfied, and since it was not met, third estate they left the Estates General and they proclaimed themselves as a National Assembly of France on June